welcome to this episode of the Redneck Mystic Lawyer podcast. With us is our resident redneck mystic lawyer, Sloan Bashinsky. Sloan, what have we leased upon the world today?
Well, we did launch something. I've been working on a book for a while, and I've struggled with writing it at times, but I had all the material in my head and in emails and in stuff I had written in the past that I set aside because I knew it was important, but I didn't know where exactly it belonged. And it's about my father, his family, and his company, which people in Alabama call the Golden Flake Potato Chip Company. And it's written from the perspective of my father's presumed oldest son, that's me. And notice I said presumed because the first chapter is about my father's actual oldest son, whose mother was African American. They were teenagers when that happened. The book is written from the perspective of the family black sheep, that would be me, the keeper of the family skeletons, that is me, from the perspective of the only other Bashinsky who actually worked full-time at Golden Flake. That is me. And before that, I worked many summers at Golden Flake in my teens and up through when I was, the summer I was 22, when I enrolled at the University of Alabama School of Law. Clerked for a federal judge after law school, and I chickened out of practicing law and went to work for Golden Flake. And I worked 4 years there, and there's a good bit in the book about my working for Golden Flake and rising up in management and some of the things I dealt with in management, some of which caused me to pull my hair out and wondered if the world had gone crazy at times. And while I was feeling like that is exactly what I was doing, and it didn't have anything to do with Golden Flake other than working there was probably the cause of it. Now,
And having read it, I could easily see why it was, I'm going to be kind here, a stressful work environment.
Well, Golden Flake was very good to its people, its line workers. My father got them created a profit sharing plan for them. They trusted him. Whenever a union tried to get in the company, they voted down because of my father. They looked for me to replace him. I was the heir. And I learned the business from the ground up in the same way my father did. After it was bought by his father and his father's brother-in-law after World War II. Now, nobody knows why that came about, how that came about, what caused it to come about, and it's a story that has never been told to the Alabama public. And it's not really a happy story. And I may say more about that and about other things. The book was published today. First, I published it it was on a blog. I had the whole thing on a blog. I took each blog post and stuck them together so that the blog, now you open it up and the whole book is the first post you're going to see. And I guess on the blog, it's about a 230-page book. But we were thinking about, Bob especially was thinking about, planted the idea in my head of submitting it or finding a book agent, literary agent, to maybe present it to a publisher, or we try to present it to a publisher directly, and not do it the way we ended up doing it today. And the reason we went in the direction we went today, not only on the blog, but I posted the link on Facebook, and then Bob put the entire book into the torrent system. How many platforms there do we have it on? 19?
19 just out of the Internet Archive system. To include, it can be
out of the Internet Archive system, there are 19.
And there are even more than that are torrent feeds separately.
Torrent feeds, yes. Torrent is like a mystery to me. It's from outer space, but I understand a lot of people, usually because a lot of people on torrent are watching our podcast, this podcast, which is averaging 80 or more thousand complete watches per episode worldwide. I told somebody the other day, Bob and I are a mega church. Not really. We
don't inspire me to have any more bad ideas. I already had considered sending this to some publisher.
We don't pass the begging bowl around. We don't ask for donations. How can we be a mega church? What are we?
Oh, dear.
We don't run advertising. We don't allow anybody to advertise on the podcast. And that's part of the reason we left YouTube. They really wanted us to let them run ads on the podcast. We were getting flagged a lot too. This book might get flagged a lot. And we're sorry. If you really want, you can send us an email and we'll send you a hurt feelings report to fill out.
Once you fill it out, we'll observe it, file it appropriately, and I can line some cages with them.
Well, no, if they send it in and some comments, I might put their comments on the blog. Well, we may read the comments in the podcast, but we really are not soliciting that stuff. The only thing we get is complaints. That come through, that are thrown at us through the people that allow us to air the podcast.
Yeah, we get lots of shits, but not a lot of attaboys.
Yeah, we're not getting anything directly, okay? And maybe people don't want us to know who they are or where they live or whatever, or if they're afraid we'll figure that out. I have no idea how to figure out something like that. Anyway, we were going to try to go mainstream, and maybe it would make some money or a lot of money, this book. I don't particularly need the money. There was a time when I did, but I don't now, thanks to an inheritance. And Bob doesn't need the money because I pay him well for doing the podcast and the publishing work. But if the thing made a lot of money, the new book, we were going to plow it back into the mega church, or we were going to give it to people that we saw that needed it, that kind of thing. We weren't going to keep a penny of it. So it was with that thought that I said, okay, we'll try to see if we can get it published. And so you told me you knew several people in the book publishing business. And was it yesterday or the day before? Day before.
It was
yesterday?
May 24 when I got the lovely missive back from, I'd spoken to people verbally and had them warn me that, well, define mysticism. I said, how the hell are you supposed to define mysticism? Well, are you saying you're channeling something, or are you channeling a being? And I said, I'm not the author of this. I'm just sort of a ramrod to see that it gets to a publisher. And they said that's really difficult after Castaneda's Witches. And I said, I have no fucking idea what you're talking about to the individual. And they said that when Carlos Castaneda finally admitted that he was not this immortal figure and that he was even taking insulin because he had gained a lot of weight, he was diabetic, which he had said that, he could heal himself of any disease. He died of a combination of insulin, shock, and cancer. That's what killed him. And in his later books, he had claimed that Don Juan Matus had, given him the cure to cancer. But they said that since the early 2000s and what happened with Castaneda's 5 principal female followers, that any book that dealt with, sorry,
the 5, you told me this, it was news to me. I knew about Castaneda's and I liked his books, but you told me that the 5 women, his principal women followers, all committed a ritual suicide after he died.
And I was getting to that. Yeah.
And that's what spooked the publishing industry about, I guess, anything that couldn't be measured with a ruler or felt by hitting your thumb with a hammer. That anything metaphysical was now unsafe. The lawyers were telling the publishers not to get involved in that.
Too much liability.
And so I want you to read the email that you wrote to me, which summarized what you were told by people that you knew in publishing.
I got it right here.
Guess what you wrote, not the attachment, the boilerplate thing that came with it. Just first read what you wrote to me.
I know 8 people in publishing, and they have said that the material, if it is sent to a conventional agent and is examined by the agent or even an editor, they would be compelled to have social services have elder care evaluate you for potential mental illness and your ability to manage your own affairs. And they would make a recommendation that you would be 1, sent for treatment, 2, have the treatment monitored, which is to say that the psychiatrist or geriatric or aging specialist would perform a urine test to make sure that you would be compliant with your medical treatment regimen. Shall I go on?
Well, yeah, keep reading.
I had explained to these people the mysticism elements. I had said that the author was somewhere between 75 and 82 years old. And I was told that unless you wanted to have your independence violated the manner I just described, they recommended that if you wanted to sell the book, put it up on Kindle Direct Publishing. They said that going to a literary agent and potentially any publishing house, one thing that gets an automatic rejection is if the material's been released freely, and it eliminates any profit motive to anyone except for someone like Kindle Direct Publishing. And I could quote some of the lines from the boilerplate if you want, but that's
the end of the email.
That's the end of the email, other than the boilerplate.
All right, read a few of the boilerplate lines.
When you tell an agent or an editor that an individual believes the author is in direct contact with biblical figures via dreams or direct contact. The next question is as follows, and I copied and pasted the boilerplate I was given. They have a check system here. Has the author or authors been adjudicated as a mental defective or committed to a mental institution through their own personal choice or as a result of legal intervention? Any person who has been adjudicated as a mental defective or committed to a mental institution is required to be referred to a mental health professional, social services, and if necessary, geriatric welfare services if their material exhibits delusional thought, which could result in the agency being held liable in a civil court for failing to notify relevant agencies. And then they listed their standards for what mental illness is and actionable mental illness.
All right. I think that's probably paints the picture of what I was looking at when I wrote my reply to you.
Yeah.
My email reply. Will you now read my reply?
I most certainly will. Bob, don't know whether to laugh or shit and go blind. I bet Michael is laughing his ass off, and you were referring to the Archangel Michael. Don't think Kindle option is right for this book, given how difficult it is to get people to read self-published Kindle books, and given how favorably we have been treated by Torrent and Archive.org and the reputation we have there worldwide. So I think that leaves...
Reputation is in quotes.
Yes.
Reputation. Go ahead.
But we haven't been stoned or had rotten fruit pelted at us, so we do have at least a decent reputation in that sense.
All right, go ahead and finish reading the email.
So I think that leaves Torrent and Archive.org and the blog versions, which I can promote in podcast. I can use Facebook to promote the blog versions. I have a lot of new Facebook friends who live in Alabama or have Alabama roots. It is possible that the title of the book might create some interest in Alabama. And that's where the reply finished.
Right. Then we had some discussions. And then I was working in a nearby coffee shop, and we were having trouble with the transfer of the book from the blog into a PDF. Because
I sure was.
Yeah, you were. And I had the blog in chapters, and I put the entire blog, all the chapters, into one blog post. And I went through it several times trying to deal with the formatting in the blog, because I'd written the blog without any paragraph indentions. So I went through every blog, every chapter, and indented every paragraph. And I did the set-offs for things that are pulled from somewhere else and set inside of it so that it's set off from the rest of it, more centered. And then I saw a bunch of young women, maybe 25 years old, at the table over from me, and I said, do any of you know how to use Google Document? And one of them said, yeah, I use it all the time. I said, well, you come over here, show me how to use that. So she spent about 15 minutes with me. And it's simple. If you have a Gmail account, which I do, you can go right into it and get I had no idea. Even though I had received some Google Documents, doc stuff, and worked with from other people and sent it back to them, I never used it myself.
Right.
And so I copied that blog and dropped it into the Google Documents document. And of course, that had a really nice editor on it. I went through with the editor. I went through with it again and again. I know I didn't catch everything, but I caught most things. I went back through it and I figured out a way to compress the line spacing in the paragraphs so that they weren't spaces between the paragraphs anymore. So it's more like a book or a manuscript. And there's a few places where there is the little space between paragraphs, but I eliminated about 99% of them on my own by figuring out how to do that with Google Doc. I don't know if I could do it again, but that day I figured it out. Anyway, so you mounted this thing onto at the internet library.
Archive, yes, the internet library. Either one is correct.
But it's the URL for it is archive.org. And you go there and you just enter Sloan Bashinsky in the search place, and it come up, and you will see several of my already published books there. Bob put them there, digitized or manuscripts like this one. And this one is The Golden Flake Clown's Tale. And you click on that, and with any kind of device, I probably known the man, they can get into, they can do this open this link. You can read the book for free with no ads.
Correct.
It's sort of like checking a book out of a library, except
you don't have to bring it back.
You don't have to bring it back, and you don't have to wait in line to get it. You've been on the wait list. It's there. And so let's talk a little bit more about the book. I said, you've read it. Is there anything you'd like to say about different aspects of the book?
I found it fascinating how little has changed in the practice of law from your perspective and your knowledge of law, because you said that one of the things that you contemplated quite seriously was becoming a small town lawyer. And you said you learned
when I was young.
When you were young. And what you found out as being the methodology of being a small town lawyer, then living in a small town, or what once was a small town, that's absolutely correct. Would you like to tell people how you are a successful small town lawyer, Sloan? What you need to know?
Yeah, well, if you're going to move there from somewhere else, my dad was so unhappy with my decision to move back to Troy, where he and his family were from, and practice law with the lawyer he knew growing up. When he was a boy, the lawyer offered me a spare room office, use of his legal secretary, and he was going to refer to me all the cases he was referring to the other lawyers in town that he didn't handle. He was a civil defense lawyer. He had his own airplane. He tried cases all over Alabama, and it was a lock and key deal. I got an invitation from the Troy Country Club to join it, and I didn't even apply. My wife and I had arranged for getting an apartment in a new apartment complex that was being built. I'd already signed up for it. Well, my dad didn't like the idea. His father didn't like it. And my dad sent me to his lawyer, John Gillen, at Spain Gillen, Riley, Tate, and Ansley back in those days in Birmingham. And John's an old, shrewd lawyer. He's a Bible scholar, theologian, from a small country town himself. He never went to law school. He learned the law by going to work for a law firm and becoming an apprentice. And that's how he became a member of the bar in Alabama. And he said, let's go to the library, Sloan. And I said, okay, John. And the whole law firm was in there because my father's company was one of their biggest clients. And my father's family was one of their biggest clients. And I'd gone to law school with two of the lawyers, and they were already practicing law. I had clerked for a federal judge. And so I was a little behind them trying to get into the law practice. And John said, I understand you want to practice law in a small town. And I said, that's right, John. He said, well, do you know what it's like to live in a small town, Sloan? I said, well, no, never having lived there. He said, well, all you got to do is go out to the golf course on Saturday night, drive around it, and find out who's fucking whose wife. And he looked through my soul, and I thought, ooh, shit. My son had died in law school. My wife and I weren't getting along too well. She was pregnant again. Hell, for all I knew, I'd probably be one of those guys fucking somebody else's wife on a road around the Troy Country Club. So I caved and went to work for Golden Flake, because by then, about a year into clerking for the judge, my gut quit working right in one day, and I lost my confidence, and I didn't feel safe trying to practice law. And so I went to work for Golden Flake, which looked like a sure thing. And the other day I had a realization that the day my gut quit working was the day I unconsciously decided to go to work for Golden Flake. That is not in the book, what I just last said, because it happened after I had finished the book.
I think one of the other things that amazed me so much about the book was a lot of people have thrown criticism at you over the internet that somehow you were rich or privileged, etc. But you had a pretty hellish childhood from being picked on just because you were associated with Golden Flake. Get called tater, shit like that, and
here's the old potato chip.
Yep,
all that.
That
I go into
doesn't go along to me with privilege. So,
well, I was born into privilege, but I also was homeless pretty much for 5 years. Not only one stretch, there were two stretches where I didn't have anything for a while. I mean, nothing. And then when I got 62, I got Social Security, so I had enough to eat or buy food to eat. And so we talked about that in the last podcast. So I have had a lot and I've had nothing. And I know both well. And I can't say anybody I grew up with and who was privileged has any idea what it's like to not be privileged. They have no fucking clue. And they didn't have, and nobody who's ever heard of the Golden Flake Company has any idea what it was like to work there.
Guess the other thing I'd like to bring up with is what ended up being the preface to the book. What has happened to Golden Flake, particularly its Birmingham operations, just very recently, sir?
Well, that's what the day I basically finished writing the book. This friend of mine I grew up with in the tiny kingdom, Mountain Brook, Alabama, who knew me well and the company well, and my father and my mother, my brother. He sent me he emailed me about that I see that the news about the Oots Snack Quality Foods closing its Golden Flake operation in Birmingham. Now, Oots bought Golden Flake back in 2016, paid cash. and paid about 3.5 times more than the stock, common stock, was selling for on the NASDAQ. And so just recently, they decided to close the Birmingham manufacturing facility. And so he sent me that, and you want to read that?
I have it right here where I can.
Yeah, because that's read them the introduction to the book. This is not the introduction, but the preface, because it's about this thing that my son Brent sent me and what I wrote back to him.
All right. You said it April 26, 2023. Of course, that childhood friend sent it. And this was a article published by Alabama.com. It's
It
written
used
by
to be the Birmingham News.
right. Utz Brands has announced it is closing the company's Golden Flake Birmingham manufacturing facility in July. The decision means about 175 employees will be laid off from the 275 member workforce. About 100 will remain in distribution operations. The company made the disclosure during an SEC filing on April 24th. Pre-tax cash charges of approximately $3 million to $5 million are expected to be incurred because of the closure. In a statement, Utz Foods Vice President Kevin Brick said Utz made the difficult decision to permanently close our manufacturing operations in Birmingham. Notably, the Golden Flake brand remains an important part of Utz portfolio, and our product offering and partnerships under this banner are not changing, Brick said. We will continue to have a presence in Birmingham and will stay an active part of the community. Utz Quality Foods, based in Hanover, Pennsylvania, purchased Golden Enterprises, Golden Flakes parent company, as you said, in 2016 for $141 million cash. Golden Flake was founded in 1923 in the basement of Hill's grocery store in North Alabama. In addition to flavored snack chips
North Birmingham.
In North Birmingham. I apologize. Let me repeat that.
That's not it. Good. It's good. Keep going.
In addition to flavored chips such as sweet eat, cheese puffs, cheese curls, tortilla chips, and snack crackers. These are made at the Golden Flakes factory in Birmingham. After reading the article, I called my childhood friend and said, "Thank God Utz bought Golden Flake."
Keep going.
When I heard from another friend today about the article, I said, "The article says nothing about my father who built Golden Flake up from almost nothing." When I told another friend about it who's tuned in, I said, Utz made its decision about the time I finished writing the Golden Flake Clown's Tale. The closing of the Golden Flake production facility in Birmingham was the sound of silence, as far as my father's family is concerned, as if we never even existed. But we did exist, and I have told some of it in this book, which would otherwise be the sound of silence in its truest sense, without you telling.
And
At that point in time, you were done, except for your apologies to great writers of orderly writing, neat and tidy, your English teacher, professors, etc. This here
Read it.
tale apologies
Read
to
it.
great writers, orderly writing, neat and tidy, my English teachers, law school professors, book editors, friends, family, and critics. This here tale came to me in ways it came to me like a patchwork quilt being stitched together, a composite of many tales in a much larger tale of the Golden Flake clown actually lived. The muse has her own ways. The mind will never fathom.
The muse has its own way the mind will never fathom. So there's stories about Golden Flake management and its decision making and its mentality, which I personally witnessed, heard, and participated in and oppose. It should drive anybody who is sane crazy.
Or just suicidal.
Yeah.
That's just me.
When I worked there, and shortly afterward, when I quit, grown men came into my office crying, begging me to stay. One of the regional managers called me on the telephone crying, begging me to stay because they saw me as their only hope. These things happened. But that's when I went into the practice of law. I felt like I needed to do it or I would die. There's a good bit in this about marketing and advertising and Coach Paul Bear Bryant and how he came to work, advertise Golden Flake products. It's really a funny story. I'm not going to spoil the plot. It's hilarious, actually, and ingenious on the part of the advertising firm that represented Birmingham during that time. There's also a kind of a bittersweet story about the advertising agency we hired to go into Atlanta with our products. And they loved me. They thought, where did Sloan Bash come from? My God, how could he be working for this company? But I was there and they loved me. But I finally sniffed them out and told them, you're fucking up, man. But the company went with them instead of with my thoughts. And it's just so many things happened that caused me to know I had to leave that company. It took a lot of these things to happen. And then there's stories about when I was in law school and my writings and all sorts. It does kind of patchwork quilt all over the place. And there's a chapter with a lot of my soul art in it. There's a chapter with my poems in it. There's a chapter with spirit medicine for adults and children, especially children that are facing being shot up in their schools. And it is a testament to really my life and to my relationship to my father and my mother and my younger brother, Major, who took his own life and tried to make it look like suicide. And through my time in Key West and the Florida Keys, the book is not about Florida Keys. There are references to parts of it. The book is a kaleidoscope. It is an autobiographical tale by the clown, who is me.
True.
I am the Golden Flake clown. Now, there was a Golden Flake clown, a hobo clown. It was their mascot. And you will see him if you open
a link to it because he's the cover of the book on a mug.
the book, and he's also at the very beginning. Is
Yeah.
the second image of him is on the entrance to Golden Flake. The first is a picture. It's a hobo clown even. How did the hobo clown know he was going to be homeless when the heir hadn't even been born yet? When the hobo clown was being used by the original owners. That's pretty far-sighted hobo clown.
No accidents in this world. Yeah, that's pretty.
So, I guess some people are hoping they'll reopen the mental hospitals in Alabama and put me in one of them. Some people have told me that many times that needed to happen, and yet, I'm not threatening anybody's life. I don't even have a gun. I do upset some people sometimes with what I tell them. I don't stalk people. I don't chase after people. But this thing I'm holding here, that's my laptop. That's like my WMD. It's
Words of mass destruction. And a weapon of mass destruction, for that matter.
Somewhat. And yet it's also an expression of who I am and what I think and what I've been through, which caused me to change the way I think about everything. And so I feel like I'm just one of God's guinea pigs who didn't get killed off yet or go completely mad. There's even a chapter in it called A Crazy Person's Bible, which basically has got my most important poetry in it that I actually saved or could remember by heart. A lot of the poems were lost. A lot of the art was lost. But I think the most important pieces of art are in the book. And it's not like any kind of art you ever saw before. Okay.
This is true.
And it is a tribute to the feminine, the divine feminine, to Eve, Rosa Mystic. So it is a smorgasbord. And I think everything I wrote in it is true. There may be a couple of places where my memory failed me, but this is not written
as an autobiography.
It is an autobiography. Which I wrote. I alone wrote it, although I used writings of other people in it who were corresponding with me, for example. And they became part of the tale. And also included is a graphic description of two lawyer feast lawsuits or litigations that occurred in Birmingham. After I returned to Birmingham from the Florida Keys, the first one involved my stepmother, my father's second wife, which was horrible, which I had nothing to do with, but being dragged into it vicariously. The second one came later. I was dragged into it because I was sued by the trustee of the main trust that my father set up because he wanted to wind the trust up and get the court's guidance and protection from my father's widow and her grandson, principally. Her grandson is my stepsister's son. My stepsister died. She was adopted by my father. He treated her as his own child. I have no problem with any of that. Or the way he set up his estate plan, where the grandson ended up with about 8 times, I think, more than any of my father's children ended up with.
And I thought that was an amazing tribute to the fact that you're not a money grubber. There was no enmity towards that individual, and
Well, there was, in the sense that what he was involved in and the commotion that was going on between him and his grandmother and my father's estate plan was delaying me just getting what I was owed under my father's estate plan and leaving. I just wanted to be taken out of it, and they could fight all they wanted, but they didn't want to do that. The lawyer wanted a big escrow set aside from all of the heirs, so he could safely deal with this particular element in my father's family, which is the step element, who didn't have a drop of Basinski blood in them, and yet ended up with about 8 times more than my father's 3 children or their bloodlines ended up with. Now, the first lawsuit was all over the Birmingham media and in the blogs. The second lawsuit was filed under seal because my brother's younger children by his second wife were minors. And so it was required, I guess, to file it under seal. That meant the media never saw the lawsuit papers. It was never reported. And some things went on in that lawsuit. I go into a good bit of it. Would never be told in public if I didn't do it. The lawsuit, I was an involuntary defendant in. And so I'm telling what was under seal, I'm out of it. I didn't put it under seal. I didn't do the things that the lawyers did, where they had 3 or 4 hats on at one time, some of them, including the trustee, or 5 or 6 hats for him. My father's attorney, who had been trained by John Gillen, who had told me what it was like to live in a small town. I went to Alabama Law School with that second lawyer, and to Alabama Tax Law School with that second lawyer. I had many conversations with him. He wrote wills for me. He's probably the one that talked my father into not letting me disinherit myself, even though I kept trying to do it. And yet, when we got into the end, he was wearing so many hats, there was no way it wouldn't get totally fucked up, given who the players were.
And ethically, for an attorney, in your own opinion?
Well, if you're the trustee and you're suing one of the beneficiaries of the trust for libel and stalking then you have slight conflict of interest between you and that beneficiary and you and the other beneficiaries whose interest you're supposed to put ahead of your own. Now, if it only been between him and the grandson, well, that's probably okay, because they're the only 2 players in the lawsuit. But my sister and my brother's children by his first wife and by his second wife and his second wife were not part of that fracas. And yet, my brother, the lawyer representing my brother's second wife, also was representing the trustee and had sued my stepmother to have her declared incompetent to manage her own affairs. His law firm had.
And you expose all of that legal fuckery and discuss it from all angles.
William Faulkner and John Grisham and Stephen King could not have got together and begun to invent this litigation, okay? There's no way it could have been invented. It actually happened. And I only tell the big parts of it. There was a lot more. It's not in the book, and some of it affected me, but mainly it just slowed down while they were doing all their stuff. It just slowed it down to where I had to wait longer than I should have had to wait and just get it over with. My sister just wanted to get it over with.
And
That's
as
all we
we,
wanted.
right, as
We
we
didn't
are
ask
now
for a moment.
reaching the 55-minute mark, so that you know roughly what time we're at.
All right.
I apologize for interrupting you.
Well, I'm glad. No, I want you to let me know where the time is. Now, I'll tell about one story. The case was set for mediation. The part where I was involved, not the one where they tried to get the grandmother committed. I mean, the stepmother. And she died during that of COVID, pneumonia, and also a minor heart attack that accompanied. That's on her birth certificate. But the newspaper said she died of a massive heart attack. Well, I have the death certificate. That ain't what killed her. She was on around-the-clock care. After that, it was just between her lawyers and me and the stepson and his lawyers. And he went through, I don't know how many lawyers, probably 20, be my guess. Finally ended up one that seemed pretty good. I actually liked her. She was a Trumper. And
No accounting for taste.
So she had also worked in Bill Barr's Justice Department under Trump. She was a friend of Bill Barr, the U.S. Attorney General, a good friend apparently, and had been a judge and a district attorney out in Colorado. Had had her own Judge Judy type TV show. I mean, she was a mover and shaker, and she's the one I think that helped bring it to a conclusion. But here's what I think finally wrapped it up. It was set for mediation, the big trust, and the lawyer sued the grandson, for libel and stalking. And I knew when that happened, there was no way the mediation was going to work because the stepson wouldn't agree to nothing while that was going on. And the lawyer did not tell the judge that was handling the trust case what he had done. If she had known he was going to do that, I doubt she'd have ordered the case out to mediation. The mediator saw the problem, but the mediation is, you can't talk about stuff that goes on in mediation. You get in a whole heap of trouble. That's supposed to be secret. So what I will say, we all agreed finally that the mediation had failed, and the mediator, who I knew when he practiced law, and then he became a good judge in Birmingham, a good man. He sent a report to the judge that the mediation had failed, but he didn't tell her why. And then she resigned or was taken off the case, and it was assigned to a lady judge in Prattville, Alabama, above Montgomery. And we had a Zoom hearing before her, and I spoke, and that stopped everybody from thinking she was going to let the grandson get all of his without us getting all ours, because that's what that hearing was about. And nobody told her about the lawsuit and how it was affecting everything. And so after it was all over, I wrote her judicial assistant a letter, copied to everybody, so it wouldn't be viewed as ex parte. In other words, private conversations with the court. And I explained what was holding everything up was the libel and stalking lawsuit by the trustee against one of the beneficiaries in the case she was given to decide. And she came out with an order that looked like an order from the federal judges of old, like, don't you fuck with this court. The court will not look kindly, now I'm using my language, okay, and some of hers, on an attempt to mess with the court. And I think that, I mean, that judge had spine. She saw exactly what was going on, in my opinion. And eventually, I think that's what caused everything to settle. That and some other discussions that were had between the lawyers and me, such as I told every one of them that there were things that nobody would ever find out because they alone knew what they are and their clients did. And if the case went to trial, I was going to put every one of them on the stand under oath and question them. And I assure you, they did not want that to happen. And I knew exactly how to do it. So I am a fucking lawyer who clerked for a United States district judge in Birmingham. And I also know that you don't do that. You don't call opposing counsel witness to testify, but I also know you can. And they did not like hearing that, and maybe that's a good place to stop.
Very well. Thanks, Sloan, for the introduction to the book. It is available on archive.org for free. No advertisements, nothing like that.
No soliciting, nothing. It's just a free read. Just like if you pull it out of a library.
It's also available on 20 plus torrent clients. And
it's also available at goldenflakeclowntail.blogspot.com.
Yes, goldenflakeclowntail.blogspot.com.
And that I use a big font, so it's real easy to read on the website. We use 12-point Times New Roman at the other places because that's what book publishers like. You know, for somebody like me, that font's too small to read. But when my early books were published, that's exactly the font that was used. So it's just a matter of age and eye strength and so forth. But those are the three places that can be read for nothing, no ads, no soliciting. You can read it or not, read part of it or not. You can get mad at me or not. It's just, it is what it is. It happened.
Good night, anti-capitalist.
So the anti-capitalist.
Yes.
I'll tell you, I didn't want to become the anti-capitalist. I wanted to be a successful capitalist. Okay. And I tried and tried and tried and tried. And it just didn't seem to be in the cards. So I became, I don't know, a writer, a poet, an artist. And I shoot off my mouth a lot.
I think that's a perfect place to stop this. Good night, Sloan.
Good night, Bob. Good night, audience. Vaya con Dios.
Vaya con Dios.